Hello, this is Ruslan Malinovsky.
Hello, this is Roman Yaremchuk.
Hello, I'm Sergey Rebrov.
And you're listening to Ukraine Plus Football.
So this is Christmas and a happy new year. Not quite, especially when it comes to Ukrainian football. This episode was meant to be rounding off 2024 and looking back on a year of difficulty, stagnation and decline. And we wanted to have a bit of positivity in there. And of course, most of that negativity is down to one perpetrator from next door. However, there are a lot of other things that I think maybe have come straight from our own doing. I mean, from a Ukrainian perspective, in a footballing sense. And just recently, just this past week, a few seismic events in the sporting world that have shocked fans in Ukraine, the UK, and beyond. And for this closing episode, we've got Mihailo Vorskla with me. Hello, Mike. It's just him and me. Adam and Ray can't join us, but they will be back soon. We have a lot to discuss in the final edition of Ukraine Plus Football for this calendar year. Strap yourselves in.
Ukraine from Ukraine, abiding by the pain. Mudryk sent to me, lost the one Champions League. So we go, no place to go. Then he said to me, I want to wake up and free.
Where else to start then than the story of, I guess, maybe the year, to be honest. We've waited, we almost closed it off without too many problems from a footballing perspective. And then bang, the start of this week, Monday evening, everything exploded. A bombshell in a figurative sense. Mihailo Mudryk was found to have tested positive in a doping test. As per Tribuna's exclusive information, they said test sample A was taken at the end of October, and that is where he was tested positive for a substance that is banned. And sample B of the test is currently being opened and being looked into. UA Football chimed in with their own kind of exclusive information saying that there's a risk of Mihailo Mudryk being banned for up to 4 years if he's found guilty, per se, of being responsible, being in the know that he took this banned substance. That was in the evening. Earlier in that same day, Hryhorchuk alluded to something that was going to come out relating to Mihailo Mudryk, which I think he said, we'll find out about something and we'll be talking about it next week on his Titanic Live YouTube channel. And yeah, I think from that, it sort of catalyzed the likes of Tribuna, UA Football, Ukrainian sources to end up getting the news out there, because I feel that the news was circulating, was being rumoured in the days beforehand. Percent sure, they had to verify it with different sources and all that kind of thing. And then obviously Tribuna broke it. In the morning of Tuesday of this week, Sabotage brought out their own exclusive information, per se, was that the banned substance was Meldonium, which is a thing that was invented during the Soviet Union in Latvia. And it was meant to be used for sort of cardiac problems, helping out with help speed the blood around the body, that kind of thing. However, according to medical experts and a lot of people in the West, it's either a placebo, it doesn't really work effectively. And from an athletic perspective, it's meant to help with endurance, with sort of recovery, that kind of thing. And is a banned substance since 2016. In the past, Russians have been banned for it. I think a lot of people were banned for it following Sochi 2014. I think Maria Sharapova served a over a year ban, but was initially banned for 2 years from it. In a tennis perspective, it's a substance that a lot of people don't really use outside of the former USSR. I think the majority of people use it in Russia, and then small instances in Ukraine as well would use it, especially it being banned. But apparently it's also completely ineffective and doesn't help. Following, obviously, that news from Tata Taker, the Times, the Telegraph, the Daily Mail started publishing their own validations of the story, that the news is out there that Mudryk has failed a doping test, tested positive in a doping test. And then following that news coming out, we heard from Mudryk himself, who posted on his Instagram, yes, I have tested positive for a banned substance. I'm completely innocent. I have no idea when it happened, where I was meant to have taken it, etc. He is going to be fighting his innocence. Chelsea came out as well. They also back his innocence, and they have been helping him, obviously, over the past week plus to try and get down to it. The investigation is ongoing, so we can't really comment any further on anything that's going to happen, the repercussions and all that. The Athletic, they confirmed that Meldonium was the banned substance that Mudryk apparently took in, according to their sources. And then they also raised the point that, as per people close to Mudryk, those people close to the case aren't ruling out potential sabotage to try and set Mudryk up per se. But as the Athletic add, they have not been able to independently verify these claims as of yet, and as of recording anyway. On top of that, Tata Taker added another per se exclusive, not something that I've seen substantiated anywhere in the UK press at the moment. They said that Mudryk has taken at least one polygraph test, which is a lie detector test, you know, the one where they strap you up, heart rate and all that kind of thing, which some people say is very unreliable. But as per the results of it, according to Tata Taker, they said that he passed with flying colours, from a sense that he was very confident, that he was completely innocent, and it sort of fed into the results that came from that. And he was way over sort of the usual, you know, when someone is meant to be telling the truth. So apparently the results of that test backed a lot. But as of now, we've not really heard any other stories relating to that going forward. On top of that, we've also got Maresca, who's Chelsea are fully with him, that he's fully with him, that he's being supportive of him, that he's spoken to him a few days ago, that evidently Mudryk is banned from training at the moment. He can't go to the training base, he can't do anything, but that the club are going to be with him, that he is hoping, and that Mudryk, when Mudryk will return, he will still be a Chelsea player. He's still in, obviously, Chelsea's plans per se, regardless of whatever the ban may end up being. So let's see where this goes, because right now, even ourselves, we don't want to, you know, start speculating anything, especially when we don't have any information. We don't know the alleged Meldonium was taken. Was it in a tablet? Was it through some other way? We don't know anything like that, so we can't really go into that any further. The sabotage claims are interesting, but, you know, similarly, we don't have any other information relating to that. I think what's next is going to be quite interesting. So if you take, obviously, an example from Paul Pogba, he was banned for something a bit different. I think it was more testosterone-related drugs ban. He was obviously initially given a 4-year ban. Then it was reduced to 18 months after CAS appeals. From a Mudryk perspective, people are saying that it can range from 2 to 4 years of an initial ban if his B sample doesn't come back as clean. There's cases that a lot of people are saying that usually the B sample, which is, I think, taken at the same time as the A sample, but, you know, is only open to see if there's any false positives or anything like that, then it's very unlikely. If the A one is positive, then the B one is possibly, most likely, positive as well. So we'll see how that ends up coming in the coming weeks. What's next is that, yeah, like I mentioned, 2 to 4 years potential initial ban. I think the 2 years is if Mudryk isn't found guilty of ingesting it on purpose, knowingly, etc. And then 4 years if he was in the know, if that can be substantiated. And then evidently he can go to CAS, he can go elsewhere. He's hired the same legal team as Pogba, even as per the Telegraph and a number of other British sources. But it's evidently a sad and obviously a troubling time for the Ukrainian. Am I right, Mike?
Yeah, I'd just say it's the last thing that he needed is this coming out at the end of the year. I think it's the last thing we all needed. We thought we were going to have a quiet end to the season, no big news stories coming out, and this breaks. And yeah, because I think he's got a lot of things to fight against. Obviously, he's got the obvious to fight, but he has the social stigma around this now because he's already a little bit of a meme within England, I'd say. Slightly, he's made some sort of like rash decisions. I'm talking off the pitch, that he seems sort of a little bit childish. So these are sort of little things that people are making like preconceived judgments of him already going into this case. So yeah, it's the last thing he needs, and whatever happens going forward, he's going to have to rebuild his reputation massively. But yeah, I'm looking to see how it all pans out when we know more about it.
Yeah, and like I mentioned on Twitter the other day as well, I said that regardless of whenever he ends up coming back, hopefully he can get his career back on track. It's just ironic that evidently he has been playing relatively well this half season. He looks to have been more stable. He looks to have been doing relatively well. There's obviously the news that he tested negative for a drugs test in August. So it's evidently happened since then. There is obviously diverging information that the positive test was taken either at the end of October. Some people are saying it was after this November international break. So no one actually knows, but Chelsea, I think, are under the impression that it happened outside of their remit. So evidently on international break or something like that. So we will have to wait and see. But yeah, like Mike said, it's just so frustrating just right now as Mudryk is, he's playing in the Conference League, he's playing in the Cups, but he was building confidence. He's been key for Ukraine, which we're going to touch on in a minute. Yeah. And then this happens.
So, like I said, he's been scoring goals. People say, yeah, it's only been in the Conference League, blah, 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 blah. But it really felt like his career was coming to somewhat ahead at Chelsea. Does that make sense? I feel like he was hitting his form, and eventually that move was either going to come maybe in January, probably more likely the summer. And now that's all just gone to whatever. So very, very frustrating from all involved. And obviously, like you say, we'll touch on that about with Ukraine, but he's left us wide open in that respect as well.
Which I think is a perfect way of sliding into our next topic. We're going to put that on hold right now. Mudryk, until we have any more further information, we can't really talk about it. But hopefully that has been a somewhat coherent explainer, as in where everything stands right now. Evidently, there's going to be updates over the next few days, weeks, months, and how all that goes. But I feel right now, with Mudryk suspended by the Football Association in England, it means that he won't be playing football, at least for the foreseeable next few weeks at a bare minimum. So that on hold. Last week, we had some interesting news from the World Cup qualifying draw. We were put in a 4-team group, which means as a result of that, in 2025, Ukraine will play their World Cup qualifiers in a September to November window next year, right? So we're going to be playing against 3 different opponents. We're in a 4-team group. Those 3 opponents are France or Croatia. Basically, those 2 are both in the Nations League quarterfinals, and they will play that in March. And then whoever wins that will then go through to the Nations League semi-finals and finals, which take place in June. And as a result of that, they can't obviously start their World Cup qualifying campaign until September anyway, hence why we've ended up in a 4-team group and we can't actually start qualifying until September because of the Nations League finals going on. And we are going to play the winner of that quarterfinal. So France or Croatia, whoever wins there, it will be another interesting match to follow in the March window. Not only, obviously, for Belgium, for Ukraine in their own Nations League playoff, but also in that one, obviously, from League A. So they're the Pot 1 team. Pot 3 team, Iceland, familiar faces, obviously faced them this year, beat them in the playoffs in Wrocław. Who scored the winner in that game? Mihailo Mudryk. And then the pot 4 team, Azerbaijan, which if we make it to that one, Mike, we will have completed the Caucasus. But yeah, what's your take on that group?
I was fairly confident looking at that group, to be fair. I know a lot of people have been a bit worried about that, talking about France. I always think Ukraine do seem to perform a little bit better against better opposition, whether that pressure is taken off them and they can go out and get a result. Obviously, don't do what they did a few years ago and get the draw with France and then go draw with, was it Kazakhstan 3 days later, But realistically, it is a big chance of getting a result because you can go into that with a free hit. Iceland and Azerbaijan, again, Iceland probably the kryptonite for Ukraine, the way they play. They're like a little bit like Albania. We saw it how they played in March. They're very gritty. They've got big players. They bully you. They get into you, and that's something that Ukraine have struggled with a lot this year. And it was only into the last 2 Nations League games that I really felt that was something that they overcame. So realistically, we should be very confident going into this. We need to find a style that suits us. We need to find, and I will come on to that. We need to find a midfield that's balanced, and I think if we get a balanced midfield, I think it cures a lot of our problems. Overall, really looking at that, like it's only 4 teams. I think that suits us. I think it's less teams to mess up against. And I also think as well with the playoffs, I think that suits us massively. We are the second best team in that. And if we don't lose, it's our own fault, put it that way.
I mean, your confidence, fair enough. I think we're going to talk a bit about the domestic scene in part 3 of this pod and how a lot of those players haven't really stepped up this year and how based on that, they still make a big percentage of the national team and whether they were able to really excel in 2025. What we can hope for is that similarly to maybe Andriy Shevchenko's first tenure in charge, obviously he had a qualifying campaign for the World Cup in 2018. Ukraine finished 3rd in that one in the end. Below who? Croatia and Iceland. So it's deja vu there. Fingers crossed we don't finish 3rd in this one because I think, yes, that would be catastrophic, realistically speaking. However, after that, then there was the Nations League, the debut one. Obviously, Ukraine actually did quite well in that one and got promoted to League A and all that. But it was where Shevchenko was able to get rid of all of his, dead wood and all that kind of thing, like I mentioned last episode. So now we've got the World Cup qualifying, of course, with Belgium too. But because of the 4-team group that we're in, we also have a June window where we actually can play 2 teams that isn't going to be some behind closed doors friendly against a club side in June to actually experiment in, to see some new faces, some new players, and hopefully that can even maybe rejuvenate, relax the team a bit, not being wholly under pressure to go straight into a tournament or something similar like we had this summer when obviously Ukraine had 3 friendlies, but it was very intense training camp ahead of the Euros because realistically Ukraine had not really had any friendlies at all over the past number of years. And I mean, when you play Lech Gdansk behind closed doors or Brentford B or something like that, I don't think it really counts. However, it's not going to be easy, like you said, Mike, but I think Ukraine should be aiming for top spot. Realistically, regardless of who they get, there's a chance evidently that they can get a result in against one of the pot 1 sides, at least in the home leg in inverted commas, and then maybe go for a draw in the away one. And then
I think sometimes how I look at it, it comes across like overly confident. This is the levels and the standards that they should be hitting, and if they don't hit that, then it's worrying signs. I think Ukraine have it in them to go out and come bottom of that group, and it would not surprise me, put it that way. But it would be a disaster. They should be looking at that to come second in that group as an absolute minimum. And I'm even with the team that they have right now, even with all the issues, that team is good enough to finish second. Yeah, the France game is a free hit. I get that. Don't get me wrong about that. But these are the standards that should be hit on a constant level. And also, like you said, it's good for some of these players who are being drafted in from the UPL. The way they were sort of given time in the other games, it wasn't really natural for them to even put on a show. Do you know what I mean? They didn't really get given the time. They were under a lot of pressure. They were given cameos. You had like Nazarenko given like the odd minutes here and there. I feel like as a footballer stepping into the squad, it might be hard to go into a position where you know someone else already has that realistically. You know, sort of like they were in the back of your head. You know, if you got put up top for Ukraine, you realistically know Dovbyk or Yaremchuk are going to be put in there. You know, Tchankov and Mudryk are going to start on the wings. Obviously, Brig will come on to that after. And I think unless you have a free hit and a free run of games, you're going to struggle to find your feet. And I feel like that's something that we can look at in the new year. Obviously, now this is what we're going to come on to about Mudryk's absence. That's now a position where someone's going to be looking at that going, I'm not going to come on now and play second fiddle. I'm going to get that position. That is mine. That is there. That is open. Tchankov's injuries, that is mine. And I think people should have that going into the strikers as well, because Dovbyk and Yaremchuk have not really been performing. Both are hit and miss, really, for Ukraine. Neither are standouts. And I personally think that position is up for grabs. So, you know, these people who step in and step up, I think it's on the management's side. They need to be given a chance, but they need to have this confidence to be like, I'm going to take that position. And I think you saw that in Kaluzhny's positioning, because he knew he was going to get that chance. He knew he was starting, and he knew he was going to get the minutes in both games. So yeah, I really would like to see in those friendlies, especially in June, I'd like to see people start and get given game time and get given sort of like a promise of like, you're going to be my winger, you're going to be my star going forward.
Completely agree with you. And I mean, like you just mentioned, Mudryk is absent now for the foreseeable. We don't know when he will be back. He might be back for Belgium. He is most likely going to be potentially out until after the 2026 World Cup, if Ukraine are to get there, you know, based on these minimal bans and all that kind of thing. So hypothetically, if he is out, left wing is now wide open. There were people 6 months ago saying that Kabayev actually deserves the left wing position more than Mudryk does. I mean, realistically, we've seen what Kabayev is capable of. Other than fluky goals in the Europa League, let's just say he's got zero impact, and he's not a national team level player in, you know, just wholly realistic circumstances and anywhere else realistically. I mean, even for Dynamo, he's not highly effective. He's good for the UPL, but I think that's about it. So the question is, who's going to be playing there? I think you just mentioned there, Nazarenko. He might have a shot at left wing. Kabayev, I think, will still probably get potential call-ups. There's evidently, you know, the likes of a Krasnitsa who plays for Ruch. I was personally thinking that if Rebrov is going to stick to playing with the left wing, I'd play Zinchenko there. As a result of that, he can actually still keep Zinchenko in the 11, play McCollenco left back. They both don't have that much pace, but at least they'll be able to overlap each other and all that kind of thing. Zinchenko's delivery is pretty good. We know that his defensive capabilities aren't amazing, but when he has played left wing for Ukraine, which isn't often, I think it's been 2 or 3 occasions, once in this friendly against Bulgaria, where he ended up playing really well and assisting Stepanenko, I think, towards the end of the game. And in that Euro round of 16 from 2021, when he was really good there, where he scored, where he's sort of all over the place. I think he even assisted Dovbyk's header at the end of the game, if I'm not mistaken. So that I think personally that should be on the table. And obviously that means that his position in centre mid is now up for grabs. I still would go against playing Sudakov and Shaparenko in there, because we've seen the problems and limitations it brings, because they're both more or less the same player. They're not out and out central midfielders. They don't really do the work defensively very well. And when they are defensive, then there's a huge sort of gap in attack, and it sort of lacks sort of what they're particularly good at. So if you play either of them, whoever's in better form at that point, I still feel that Sudakov is the better player at the moment. Shaparenko seems off the boil, as we've mentioned over the past few podcasts. I would actually personally put Yarmolyuk in. We'll see if he continues to start for Brentford. Obviously, he's now in this sort of little purple patch of starts for them where he's playing particularly well. He's got the opportunity. I know that Brentford have got a few injuries, hence why he is playing in that role. But if he can make that his own and carry on getting regular minutes until March at a bare minimum, and I feel that he actually should be one of the primary candidates to start in the middle of midfield against the Belgium side. That is actually relatively old and not as good as it was, of years gone by. And that energy, that tenacity, like when he was playing against Chelsea, he was like, he was doing a few fouls here and there, but he was just everywhere, picking the ball up. And that's what you want, and I feel that he's young enough as well, and he's hungry enough, because it feels that Shaparenko in particular has lost a bit of that at the moment. Maybe it's because of the fact that he's obviously hasn't left Dinamo yet. He wants to play abroad and all that kind of thing. But on the whole, until that obviously changes, I want to see someone who's hungry, like you mentioned, Kaluzhny. No guarantee that he will start either, but it's good to have that hunger in there. And I mean, even with Brashko, you've got two very capable defensive midfielders in that position now. And if Rebrov doesn't go for the left wing position, instead, maybe he's going to switch to 5-3-2, something that we have seen him play before in the Euros, especially like when we played against Belgium in the Euros this summer. He also used a kind of a 5-3-2 against Germany in his debut game again when we were at Bremen, if you remember that one, Mike. So that is also an option. I guess the question will be, you can then get rid of the right wing question as well, which at the moment isn't particularly has an abundance of great talent there either. Zubkov obviously is playing relatively well for Shakhtar, but he's quite ineffective when he's playing there for Ukraine. Hryhorchuk doesn't look convincing either. He doesn't look anywhere near as good as he is for Pusic per se. He just doesn't have the pace, in my opinion, for that position to be able to be that effective and how Ukraine want to play anyway on the counters. So if you get rid of that, people are going to say, what about Tsahankov? When he is back, when he is fit, there's no guarantee that that's going to happen either, because he is very injury prone. But if he is fit, you can play him in the same position that he played in that Germany game in 2023, where he was like sort of a support striker for whoever was the centre forward. And I felt that worked particularly well, because then he can drift out wide slightly, put the balls in, come into the box, offer goals if needed as well. And then it also prevents the problem of Dovbyk and Yaremchuk, who in that Belgium game when we were playing with two centre forwards, they were kind of getting on each other's toes as well. And actually, just saying it out there, Yaremchuk could play left wing, because he has played there in the past a couple of occasions. Remember, he came off on against Bosnia in the playoff, played out wide slightly with Dovbyk still in the middle, and he looked really good. Well, he looked a lot more effective there than when they were playing together against Belgium, because both of them sort of were getting caught up on each other's positions, running into the same spaces. When they weren't, they was like, do I pass to you? Do I take a shot? It was like caught in two minds, and I feel that might be a bit too difficult, because both of them are kind of these traditional out-and-out centre forwards that whenever they have played, it's usually with just themselves. So to adapt to playing with someone alongside you who isn't maybe a bit more versatile, like a Tsahankov, who'd be more of a wide player that's coming in to support there, then I feel that it would run into maybe some difficulties. So we'll have to wait and see, but I feel that those are the current options to us. Listeners, we're very interested to hear. So, add your comments on Twitter, etc. once you have taken that in. But Mike, what's your take on that? Which way should we go?
I'm a huge fan of the 5-3-2. I've always been a big fan of the tough football, five at the back, and the two up top. I think as well, someone who would excel in that 5-3-2 is Konoplia, because he's someone who's been playing exceptionally well for Shakhtar this season, and it would give him more freedom to bomb up and down that right flank. And I think he could be someone who could becomes such a key player in that Ukraine squad. And like you said about Tyankov, he's so versatile. You know, he can play just behind the strikers. He can play just off the strikers. I think that's the way forward. It's definitely, I don't think the last formations has been really working. It's been a bit stagnant. Like if you watch Ukraine's matches, right, it's all a bit mismatch. It's all a bit hit and hope. It's, you know, right, if you're receiving the ball in midfield, and I know I said this last time, you should really know where the rest of your players are. It should be like instincts. And Ukraine don't play like that. I think that is part of the fact of how the wingers are brought into it, and I think how the fullbacks are brought into it, and how the balls are played down the line. And I think you'll cut that out with this 5-3-2. And like you said, whoever it is, it needs to be built around that three in midfield, whoever that is. And if you get that right, that will solve a lot of Ukraine's problems, and I'll see us excelling. I like the sort of Sudakov playing in there, and Tyankov and Kaluzhny. Yeah, Shaparenko. His attitude at the minute is very in question. Playing in the UPL as well, you can't really have that attitude, you know, with the strength of it. But like I say, the Yarmouk coming in from Brentford. I know I'm tying this back, but if you walk in when you're playing first team football week in, week out, you walk in the Premier League, sorry, you walk in with a bit of pedigree. Do you know what I mean? I think you walk in with that confidence, however old you are, however many goals you've scored. And if he's playing all right for Brentford, automatically I think you come in with a level of standard that will raise the bar in the Ukraine dressing room. So I think he's someone that should be looked at as well. But I think 5-3-2 going forward is something, and Konoplia will be the best player in that system.
Yeah, but just to wrap up this kind of international segment, worth mentioning that if Ukraine do finish second in this group, they will end up going through to the playoffs of the World Cup qualifiers, which will take place in March of 2026. And you have to go through the same kind of process that we did in 2022 when we didn't make Qatar. So you play a semi-final, allegedly 2 legs, but I'm not sure whether that's actually true. I think it's just a one-legged tie, and you get drawn either home or away. And then the winners of that, you play the winners of another semi-final. But I think if Ukraine get in the top rankings, where they end up being in pot 1 in those playoffs, if they were to finish second, so winning the games in June from a friendly perspective, and winning as many games as you possibly can in the qualifiers, if Ukraine even were to obviously miss out due to the pot 1 team in the group, means that Ukraine will be in pot 1 for the playoffs. And then as a result of that, you've got a great chance, almost like 100% chance, that you'll be playing a playoff entrant from the Nations League. And as a result of that, you evidently can play someone from League C. I can't remember which country it is, but the League D one is San Marino. So, I mean, I know they're on the up, and people will make a joke that obviously, they'd even be a problem for Ukraine at the moment. But realistically, Ukraine could get San Marino in the semi-finals if evidently they do well enough, but not well enough to win the group, but finish second, etc. So we'll wait and see. Obviously, we're still months away from Belgium. Millions of things can change and happen by then. But there are options available to Rebrov. It's not the end of the world if Mudryk isn't there at that time. We're just going to have to adapt and try and make our second ever World Cup without him. Now we're back to the domestic scene / the European scene. The winter break is officially in place. You know, it's everyone's getting ready for the Christmas holidays and all that kind of thing. New Year's evidently a big thing in Ukraine. I was in Gelsenkirchen last week. First time I was there this season to see a Shakhtar home game in the Champions League. Sadly, they ended up getting absolutely battered by a second string Bayern Munich that included a 38-year-old Thomas Müller, which is problematic to say the least, and disappointing. But they scored a goal. They actually looked all right for the first opening 15-20 minutes, and then it sort of fell apart. Something that we've actually seen too many times before with Shakhtar. It was like against Porto last year, against a number of other teams. And evidently that puts them in a very, very, very low footing for the Champions League knockout stages next year. They've got Brest now to face and Dortmund in the final 2 games at the end of January. We'll see what happens, but obviously with the winter break, the first ever time that there'll be competitive games for Ukrainian sides in January, I think the plan for Shakhtar is that they will reconvene together in Turkey at the very start of January, I think 2nd or the 3rd or something like that. And then they will have their camp there. They will obviously have a few friendlies potentially. And then from Turkey, they will fly to Germany, where they'll play against Brest. Then they'll fly back to Turkey, carry on training there. And they'll fly out to Germany again to play Dortmund and fly back to Turkey and continue with their mid-season winter camp until the UPL returns. So we'll see how that ends up happening. At the end of the press conference, I asked Pusic, will we be seeing any transfers in and out? He said that he's got to talk to the management about the plans for that. We'll see. I think they definitely need a bit of depth in there. And one person that they probably could have done with and could have done with buying, I think a year and a half ago, was Bogdan Mihailichenko, who I think they turned down from buying for 3 million euros from Anderlecht, who then he ended up going to Dinamo Zagreb, but there was problems there, and then he signed for Policia, who he ended up scoring the winner for against Shakhtar in the last game of the UPL before the winter break for both sides. And it's like Ala Khram, who is absolutely not to the level of the Champions League at bare minimum. He's had like a few minutes in the UPL at best. I think he maybe had 1 start or something like that, if that. And he's had 2 appearances in the Champions League playing at right back against Bayern Munich. He played centre back with Matvienko pushed out left. And it was like, actually, this guy's so out of his depth. He was at fault for a number of the goals. He was really, nervous, evidently. I think he's only 19, 20. So he's got really inexperienced. You've got Azarov on the bench, who is actually relatively good from a Georgian perspective. For some reason, Pusic doesn't trust him. Don't know why. It would have added a lot more solidity, rigidity there. And then playing Marlon Gomez at defensive mid instead of Krupskyi, who Marlon Gomez is sort of a replacement for Sudakov per se, more of an attacking midfielder who's, creative and that kind of thing. At the very worst, he's a central midfielder, certainly not someone who can play at the base of midfield, trying to, win duels, break up play and all that kind of thing. And as a result of that, he was subbed at half time because he was absolutely rubbish. But Ali Khram sadly played the whole game, and as a result, Shakhtar lost 5-1. Catastrophic, according to Ihor Burbas. Pusic won't be going anywhere for the time being. He'll be staying. Evidently, I think that's a decision that maybe, Mike, you can probably understand, that on the basis that who would Shakhtar bring in right now? Is there really anyone better they can find? There's obviously rumours that, okay, maybe you can give it to Dario Serna, but similarly, he's got no real coaching pedigree. Would he really be any better? Would it be another stopgap until the summer where someone comes in, more weird signings like the Gram, and then more suspect tactical personnel decisions in the Champions League, and you get the same position? Well, actually, from next season, there won't be a Champions League because our teams are starting in the second qualifying round. Whoever wins the UPL, Shakhtar are 10 points off Dinamo with a game in hand right now. So there's big problems. And I feel that both Shakhtar and Dinamo right now aren't really accepting the reality of what's happening in the near future. I think they're just continuing with, how it's been over the last few years, how it's been over the last few decades, and don't understand that actually from next season, shit's going to hit the fan, quite honestly. And it's going to be very difficult to attract talent, regardless of obviously how much you pay them, with the war, with the fact that Champions League football won't be guaranteed. Not even Europa League will be really guaranteed, because you're still going to have to go through at least 2 qualifying rounds to get there if you drop from the Champions League. I think, I think you might start in the third qualifying round if you win the Ukrainian Cup, or finish second if you're the same team that wins the Cup. And then obviously second, third, fourth go into the Conference League in the early qualifying rounds as well. So there is even a chance that Ukraine will have zero representation in Europe next year if the worst comes to the worst and people repeat poor performances in qualifying rounds. So what's your take? And I mean, Dynamo weren't any better, were they?
No, Shakhtar were embarrassing. Dynamo were embarrassing. And like I said, I put on Twitter, and I said I could probably play centre back for both teams here. Pusic, sorry, just to go back to Shakhtar, it's very odd statements. For someone, he comes out, he talks very defeated. He's very defensive in his press conferences, which I always think is a worrying sign. And if I was that Graham had a terrible game, and we'll all be the first people to say it, he made that defence look very bad. But he was sent into the lion's den by the manager. Do you know what was anyone expecting for that for him, really? I don't know. Dynamo Kiev, where do you even begin with that? It was some of the worst defending I've ever seen. And I just cannot get into their matches this season. Do you know what I mean? I just cannot spare watching them. And like you said, it's going to get very serious very soon. The reality of it is they will not be qualifying for European competitions in the near future. And those qualifying playoff legs that you get dropped into, people think you just get like a rogue European team, or it's a bit of a breeze sometimes the first couple of rounds. There's always some big teams that drop into that, and it is not an easy run. So there's some very, very worrying times ahead.
And that's the question. It's like Dynamo similarly have their own defensive problems. Brian Ceballos ended up signing for New England Revolution last week. And it's like he actually looked like a relatively promising defender in the few games that he played, but evidently wasn't favoured by the management. And now he's gone, and Dynamo are playing, obviously, Bilovar is terrible, the son-in-law of the owner, that kind of thing. Popov is clattering into Bilovar in the middle of that Europa League game. It's like, this is kind of comedy stuff. Yes, they played better in the second half, but Real Sociedad stepped off the ball. They evidently didn't need to do anything else. They already had 24 shots on 14 on target. Bushjan had a great game of his life kind of thing, but still obviously conceded 3 times. So it's like, I don't really get it, evidently. And it also, I guess, shows how poor the UPL is, that they're top. and it's like, then you look at the competition near them. Shakhtar have been really bad domestically. Alexandria, evidently their closest rivals this season to Dynamo, ended up losing 3-0 to Dynamo last week. And that was kind of a no contest where Dynamo really cruised to that. No questions asked domestically. They're playing really well. And yes, they just got past Veres. They weren't too good there, but they still seem to be the best team. And it's like, when that's the best domestic team, who are playing sort of second string lineups in Europe to try and save themselves for the domestic game and win the Premier League, for what purpose? So that this circle can go again and they can go into the Champions League qualifying, lose there, go into the Europa League, lose all their matches, and then just try and win the domestic league. But it's like, what's the league for anyway these days? Because it's lost so much of its impact now, because if you win the league, you don't qualify for the Champions League anymore. So in my opinion, yes, okay, for the average fan, they can obviously do one on Shakhtar fans, for example, which is fair enough. But I think the grand scheme of things, it's like very much lost its purpose, especially for Shakhtar and even Dynamo perspective, because of how they're performing in Europe. I mean, Shakhtar, in my opinion, would, like I mentioned in previous episodes, would still be doing better than Dynamo would be in this particular opposition in the Europa League, in my opinion, based on how they play in the Champions League. They're not completely hopeless, just hopeless per se. And at least they've actually won a game, they've drawn one, they've scored goals, they actually play some all right football sometimes, whereas Dynamo actually show nothing in Europe. And it's just like Viktor Vatsko brought this up. Here's a good talking point, I think, for everyone listening, for you, Mike, as well. What have Dynamo's big sales outgoings been based off in recent years? It's been based off solely of good performances in European competitions and maybe even the national team. Obviously, Zabarnyi, he had, I think, 2 group stage campaigns of the Champions League under his belt before he left. He played a full campaign of the Europa League season as well before he left in January of last year. He's been a starter for Ukraine since the age of 18. He's almost on 50 caps or whatever. He was obviously on maybe a bit less a year and a half ago, but still, there was justification in Bournemouth spending 22 million, and we're seeing what he's doing right now. He's probably our Ukrainian player of the year. I think there's no contest really for him, for anyone on that respect. And then you've also got Mykolenko, who left the year before that for around 21 million, similar amount of money. Tsahankov also left the year before that, the summer before, I can't remember when it was, but it was when it was in January of 2022 as well, where he had this kind of lull in January 2023 as well, where he had this lull, obviously, for 18 months. Then he really picked up when he left. Evidently, he was not motivated to play well at Dynamo and really was trying to force himself out. Maybe that's what Shaparenko's doing right now. I don't actually know, but you'd hope that realistically he'd end up getting a move. But from Tsahankov's perspective, he only had 6 months left on his contract. In the end, a favourable deal was reached, and Dynamo were kind of forced to let him go because they were either going to let him go for absolutely nothing or get 5 million plus some good sell-on clause as well, which they ended up getting. Whereas I think Shaparenko's got a number of years left on his contract, so an easy escape, per se, is not near at all. And my point being is, prior to those 2 sales, obviously with everything that happened with the full-scale invasion, players leaving, Verbic, Kinzora, but still, they wouldn't have garnered big fees. Who would have been the last big outgoing player for Dynamo? Most likely Andriy Yarmolenko back in 2017 or whenever that was. And that was off a number of good seasons in the Champions League, Europa League, obviously for the national team and all that. And we all know that he also overstayed his welcome at Dynamo. He probably should have left a few years before that too. But all of those players commanded good fees because they were playing in Europe. They were playing relatively well, showing something of themselves. Whereas right now, Dynamo is still wanting big fees for their players, but they're playing absolutely awfully and not showing anything in Europe. And that's for the past number of seasons now. Obviously, Dynamo didn't qualify last year. The season before that, that Europa League campaign just after the full-scale invasion started was absolutely terrible. This one is going to beat it somehow, which I thought was going to be very difficult to beat, but we're getting there. 1 goal scored, a fluke one by Kabayev. Vanat, who wants to leave, he's scored the most goals of any Ukrainian player and created the most goals in terms of goals plus assists in the 2024 calendar year. But realistically, is anyone going to be paying over 10 million for him, for someone who's not scored any goals in Europe? No, he's the 3rd choice striker for Ukraine as well. Okay, yeah, he scored one against Czech Republic. Is anyone going to be paying big money for him justifiably? Absolutely not. Especially after you've just seen what's happened with Mudryk and the risk of paying big money. I think a lot of people are going to be put off even more by that, regardless of obviously the outcome of how that's going to do. There's going to be implications on that. Brashko, is anyone going to realistically pay over 10 million for him? Yes, he's a starting national team player, but he's not really shown anything amazing in Europe yet either. How many more years are they going to have to wait in Dynamo to try and get a good performance in Europe or consistently? Is that ever going to happen? Is another question. Mehavko, there was those rumours that Porto wanted to pay 10 million for him, but they got rejected because Dynamo wanted more. should have taken it and run. They would have got a sell-on fee. It's just. I think it's just kind of a delusion / like I just mentioned. These clubs are living in the past. They need to get with the reality. Sell these players for a bit cheaper. Let them go flourish. You're going to get a sell-on clause if they do well. What's the point? What is really the point in letting them marinate? Yes, you're going to lose, obviously, maybe a key talent, but they're not adding that much value right now because you're still doing relatively awfully in Europe and all that kind of thing. Okay, yeah, you're going to win the UPL, but like I said, the value of winning the UPL is completely diminished in recent years, and especially from next year and from 26-27. If Ukrainian sides don't pick up any more coefficient points in those final 4 matches that they've got against Galatasaray, RFS, against Brest, against Dortmund, then there is a chance that Ukrainian champion in 26-27 is going to start in the first qualifying round in the Champions League. So good luck. Is all I can say. I don't know what your thoughts are on that, Mike, but I'm sure they're pretty similar.
Yeah, it's starting to look like a little bit of a prison is the UPL. Players can't leave. And I think it's a huge negative. It has a huge negative impact on the national team. It stunts the growth of many players, and I think a lot of teams will see that when trying to sign players, that players won't want to go into the Ukrainian Premier League because of how people view it now. And that's the sad factor of it all. You can see it with Shakhtar, they can't draw those Brazilians in. You know, they get a few of them, but they aren't on the same quality as they used to be. I don't know where we go from here, really. It's looking very, very bleak.
I agree. We'll have to wait and see. Like I just mentioned, evidently Shakhtar lost to Policia in the final game. Dinamo beat Veres 1-0, so they're now 5 points clear of Alexandria, 10 points clear of Shakhtar. Evidently, everything can change in the second half of the season with the way that the mayhem is of the January transfer window in Ukraine. We don't fully know who's going to stay, who's going to go, and all that kind of thing. But if I was going to predict if there were going to be any big exits, especially for any big money, I would be surprised. I'm not going to lie. If there are going to be any exits, I think it's going to be down to Ukrainian sides probably having to, get a bit more realistic and letting their players go for a bit less. If not, then maybe we'll have to wait until the summer. Elsewhere in the UPL, Carrasco ended up leaving LNZ as the head coach. We had those rumours last episode. Hryhorchuk, at time of recording, has been officially announced as the new manager there. Evidently, he's had some good experiences with kind of middle sides. He did really well with Chornomorets in the early 2010s, when I think they were kind of a similar size club in terms of budget and money and, that kind of thing, where he brought them to, those Europa League spots and did well there. Evidently, I think that's going to be a hard task, even with LNZ, who have got similar good budget, good training base, everything, the infrastructure you need to have a good side. I think they just need good coaching and maybe a bit more balance in their squad brought in. And I think Hryhorchuk might be the guy that can actually do that, because evidently he was with, obviously, Chornomorets recently. Couldn't really hit the ground running there because of the limitations that they had in their budget, the instability that they've got. Chornomorets right now, by the way, they've got a transfer ban, allegedly, according to Tato Teker, because of outstanding debts that they've got to a few ex-players. But I think it's only around 100,000 euros, the debt. So if they can pay it off before the start of the year, then that transfer ban, which apparently might extend to 3 windows, will be taken off if they can pay it. But that is if they do or not. And one thing I just want to touch on as well, Vorskla, they've ended up having a bit of a clear out, a number of players. Viktor Kornienko, I think, the under-20 World Cup winner, he's been let go. Kovtsalyuk, who they brought in as a player last winter from Dila Gori in Georgia, who's playing really well over there, he's left. Maximov is having evidently a clear out. He wants players that want to fit his system. I think ones that fit his mentality, however it is. He's quite a specific manager. They had quite a disappointing end to the year, evidently losing to Inholets, losing to Shakhtar, and just in general being relatively flat. So changes need to happen there. From a Krupskyi perspective, we were talking about him a few weeks ago, about, him going to America. There was an agreement reached with New England Revolution where he could have, I think, gone to join up with Ceballos. But as far as I'm aware at the moment, might be falling apart. And it's kind of disappointing because I think that would have been a good move for him. From the sort of rumoured money that was going to be his most expensive right backs in MLS history, incomings, evidently could have built a few seasons there and then got a big move to maybe a mid-table club in Europe or something like that. He's currently playing for Vorskla. It's similar to what we've been talking about these clubs earlier with Dinamo, Shakhtar, sort of getting realistic. I think some of these players need to get a bit realistic as well, because some of these opportunities don't come around very often. You probably need to take them. And I think that a lot of people are sleeping on the MLS. Yes, okay, some of our older players have gone over there in recent times. Krivtsov is now a free agent looking for a new club. Svatok has got a new start under a new manager at Austin. Hopefully he can hit the ground running from the new season there. Chubarko's been doing really well at Columbus Crew, who's obviously a bit younger. But Krupskyi, he can develop into a very promising talent. He's still a bit off the national team from a starting perspective, because Konoplya, I think, is going to be quite difficult. But I wouldn't be surprised if he, would be able to make it into the national team some point soon, if he was to maybe make this move to MLS, on the basis that call-ups still happen from there. Krivtsov got call-ups when he arrived to MLS. Svatok's got his last call-up in October after he had a bit of a run in the first team there. Chubarko not yet, but maybe he's just not seen as highly as the other two. So I wouldn't have been thinking that maybe a hindrance to the national team, like some other Ukrainian YouTubers and bloggers have been saying, would happen if he moved to MLS. I think that's kind of a bit of a cop-out. And it's the question of, are any European clubs out there wanting to pay as much money that, that New England Revolution want to do? I'm not sure. I've not really heard any rumours around that perspective at the moment. And it's kind of going to be disappointing if Krupskyi does end up staying at Vorskla. We'll see what happens, keeping tabs on that. To end this episode on a positive, Dovbyk has ended his goal drought. Finally, for Roma, 9 games without any goals, and then he scored a couple against Sampdoria in the Cup. Hopefully he can retain that first team spot in the league as well under Ranieri soon. Return there. Let's see how our other talents abroad end up playing over this winter period. Very intense in the Premier League. Elsewhere, a few other sides have got obviously rests and all that kind of thing over Christmas. But nonetheless, we'll be back very soon, early in the new year, to offer some more insight and some interesting takes and hopefully some new content from that perspective. From me, Mike, Adam, Ray, everyone, Merry Christmas. Happy New Year. On to 2025. Fingers crossed it's a positive one, not just for us, not just for Ukrainian football, but for Ukraine on the front and with everything that's going on there too. Thanks to everyone who's serving right now, who might be listening. We really appreciate everything that you do. And here's 2025.
Don't